On what should have been an ordinary Saturday, FBI agent Daniel Hayes walked outside his home only to be confronted by HOA President Margaret Sloan and two men in mismatched vests calling themselves community enforcement. They tried to put him in cuffs, believing they could scare him into silence. But Daniel wasn't just a neighbor they had chosen the most feared agent to provoke. Would intimidation win, or would the truth shatter their plan in front of everyone? If this strikes you, please like and share. Let's dive into the story. I was on my front porch in Plano, Texas, the kind of Saturday you don't notice until it's gone, sun warm on the steps, a mower droning 2 yards down, sprinklers ticking in perfect little arcs. Kids coasted their bikes past the mailbox line calling to each other, and a blue jay heckled the world from the top of a crepe myrtle. Ordinary, steady, safe. Daniel Hayes pushed open his door like he always did around this time, a black trash bag in one hand, phone and keys in the other. He's in his 40s, tall, carries himself like a man who doesn't waste movement. Not unfriendly, not loud, just present. The kind of neighbor who returns a wave with a nod and clears a storm drain when it clogs without making a speech about it. That morning, he stepped out into the light, blinked once, and started down the walkway. Only he didn't get far. 3 figures stood at the lip of his driveway, right where the concrete meets the street, anchored there like lawn ornaments someone forgot to take in. In the middle was Margaret Sloan, our HOA president. Chin lifted, a leather folder hugged to her ribs like a badge. On either side of her were 2 men in black tactical vests with fat white patches that read Community Enforcement. If you've never seen a real vest up close, you might miss why these looked wrong. The first told on itself from 20 paces. The armhole swallowed the man's shoulders. The side straps sagged in a sad loop like a belt with no more notches. A raw thread hung from the hem and wagged when the breeze found it. The other vest was the opposite, cinched too tight and riding high like a kid in his dad's jacket. Both men wore boots that had seen more swap meets than patrols, scuffed toes, mismatched laces, salt lines etched in white. One had mirrored sunglasses that reflected nothing but our tidy cul-de-sac and his own nerves. The other had a beard that tried to say, "Don't test me," and hands that couldn't stop fiddling with a Velcro tab. On their chests, the patches were clean as a catalog photo. On their faces, the expressions were stiff and rehearsed. It was costume more than uniform, theater more than authority. I set my coffee down. Across the street, a curtain sighed and lifted, then another. The mower cut out mid-row. Even the blue jay shut up. Daniel slowed. He didn't posture or puff himself up. He just stopped in the broad square of his driveway and studied what had planted itself there. He took it in like a man who reads rooms for a living, angles, spacing what each hand was doing, where their eyes went when they thought no one could tell. He shifted the trash bag to the ground and didn't take a step closer. Calm is a real thing when it's earned. You could feel it come off him. Margaret did what Margaret does, filled the silence before anyone else could. She stood 3 inches forward of her 2 companions, sharp bob catching the light mouth, set in that thin, patient line she wears to board meetings. She has a way of making the rules sound like a favor she's doing you. Her folder was already cracked open to a sheet with highlighted text. She decided this would be procedural. Eddie, the taller of the 2, rocked on his heels like he wanted to own the ground he was standing on. Big shoulders, shaved head, the kind of bulk that confuses size for authority. The other one, Sean kept glancing at Margaret, then at Daniel, then at his own boots like answers might be stamped in the leather. Every so often his tongue touched the front of his teeth like he was counting them. Their vests creaked when they breathed. Their belts had pouches that didn't seem to hold anything. One of the radios wore an earpiece that wasn't plugged into anything at all. The street felt it before anyone said a word, that small pressure change when a normal morning clicks into something else. A dog 2 houses down barked once and retreated. Bicycle chains slowed. Spokes whispered to a stop. A father put a hand on his kid's shoulder without looking away. The air had the brittle quality of a glass that's already cracked one wrong tap, and it goes. Daniel's eyes moved once left to right, taking the 3 of them in a single sweep, then rested on Margaret. He didn't frown. He didn't smile. He just leveled that quiet attention on her like he was giving her a chance to choose a better line. His hands were open at his sides. That's a detail I remember because it made the 2 men's hands look worse by comparison, one hovering a little too close to his belt, the other rubbing a thumbnail over a scab on his knuckle, like he needed something to do. If anyone in this neighborhood believed in Margaret more than Margaret believes in Margaret, I haven't met them. She's never met a bylaw she didn't laminate. She can spot a trash can from the street that's 1 inch taller than regulation and tell you the SKU number. There's a way ambition looks in a cul-de-sac. It looks like her, planted in the road on a Saturday folder at the ready, with 2 men dressed to frighten. Daniel inhaled. You could see him file the moment. He didn't look back at his front door. He didn't call for anyone. He didn't move at all. Eddie shifted his weight and squared himself to Daniel like a football player lining up at the whistle. Sean mirrored him a beat later, late enough for anyone paying attention to notice he didn't know the choreography. Their boots scraped the concrete. New nylon has a smell when it warms in the sun. It drifted across the driveway and mixed with cut grass and gasoline. It was the smell of trying too hard. From my porch, I could feel my own heartbeat in the railing under my palm. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was that particular neighborly dread that something ignorant was about to dress itself up as official and ruin a good day. Daniel bent at the knees a fraction, just enough to set the trash bag down without breaking eye contact. The bag landed with a soft thud. He straightened all 6 feet of him in the open, and you could sense both men on either side of Margaret realizing at the same time that the man in front of them wasn't going to flinch first. Margaret's jaw worked once, twice. She adjusted the folder even though it didn't need adjusting. When she spoke, her voice came out colder than the morning deserved, like she'd practiced it and liked how it sounded in an empty room. Mr. Hayes, she said, each syllable evenly measured, we need to talk. And just like that, the day we all thought we were having was over. Margaret had the first word, but Eddie Cross took the first step. He shouldered past her like a bouncer, claiming the doorway, big frame filling the space where concrete met street. Sun flashed off his shaved head. He jabbed a finger toward Daniel's chest and announced it like he'd practiced in a bathroom mirror. You're in violation of neighborhood regulations, he said. You're being detained until police arrive. The word detained hit the block like a thrown rock. Somewhere behind me, a screen door clicked shut. Daniel didn't budge. He was still halfway down his driveway, the morning bright on his shoulders, the black trash bag tucked beside his sneaker. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. On what authority, he asked. Margaret slid into the lane Eddie opened for her, flipped her folder, and produced a sheet bristling with highlights. She held it up at a slant so it would catch the light and the cameras she knew were watching. Multiple violations, she said, crisp as a summons. Unauthorized modifications to the driveway, non-standard sealant and edging. Repeated loud gatherings past quiet hours. Failure to comply with written notices from the board. She kept talking, and the list kept growing. Bins left out, a hedge too high by 2 inches, an exterior light of inappropriate color temperature. It would have been funny if her mouth weren't so set. It wasn't the rules, it was the relish. Daniel eased the trash bag a foot farther with the side of his shoe and folded his arms. Not defensive, just done being a prop in someone else's theater. Who gave you the power to cuff me on my own property, he said, because that's what your man just threatened. Eddie's jaw flexed. You heard her, non-compliance. We'll hold you until the responding units get here. Daniel's eyes went to the paper in Margaret's hand. May I see that? Margaret hesitated, then gave a tight smile like generosity cost her nothing, and passed the sheet to the shorter man in the vest. Sean Miller. I'd seen him around in a beat-up pickup with a ladder in the back. He took the page and stepped forward, clearing his throat like a kid called on in class. This is a board resolution, Sean read, voice wobbling. Issued this date, authorizing immediate enforcement action at, 214. He glanced to Margaret. She nodded. He swallowed and kept going, pointing to a seal stamped in the corner. It's got the HOA seal right here. Daniel didn't take the paper from him. He leaned in, hands still folded, and looked with the kind of attention that makes ink uncomfortable. That's not your letterhead, he said quietly. Your real stationery has the logo centered, not left justified. And that seal's a transfer sticker. The ridge is still on it. Sean blinked. His eyes flicked unhelpfully to the sticker. Eddie shifted, annoyed. Daniel tapped the signature line with the knuckle. This is not how Margaret signs her name on official notices. She loops the G. This is printed. And if this is a board resolution, where are the minutes? Where's the vote count? Margaret's smile pinched. We're not here to debate formatting, Mr. Hayes. We're here to enforce, Eddie added, stepping closer as if proximity could make the paperwork real. Across the street, a blind crept up half an inch, then two. A man in a ball cap leaned out just far enough to get his phone into the frame. Two teens on scooters had stopped dead at the corner and were arguing in whispers about whether to hit record. The quiet had gone thin and tight stretched over something sharp. Daniel's voice stayed level. You show up in my driveway in costumes and quote fake authority. You wave a sticker and call it a seal. And you think you're going to put your hands on me? Sean's mouth opened, then closed. His thumb found the edge of a Velcro strap and whirred it back and forth. The sound carried more than it should have. Eddie squared up, happy to be the wall. You think you're special. Hayes? He leaned into the name like it tasted bad. People whisper your name. I've heard it. Doesn't mean a thing here. I felt that line go through the crowd like a current. Not everyone caught it, but those who did looked up. Whisper your name. It wasn't the kind of thing you say to a guy you think is just another neighbor with a trash bag. Daniel didn't blink. If people are whispering, he said it might be because they don't like shouting. Margaret snapped the folder shut. This is a simple matter, she said, each word clipped. You've ignored notices. You've disregarded the standards the rest of us live by. We've moved past reminders. Past the law too, apparently, Daniel said. Eddie took another half step, forcing Daniel to decide whether to give ground. He didn't. They were 2 feet apart now. You could see the pores on Eddie's forehead. You could also see the first edge of doubt work its way into his mouth. Another curtain lifted. A front door opened and stayed cracked just enough for a lens. Somewhere a mower coughed back to life and died again. The neighborhood was awake and watching. Sean tried once more to make the paper matter. We have the right to detain. You don't, Daniel said, and he said it without heat. You don't have the right, and you don't have the training. If you did, you wouldn't say detain, like it's a magic word. Margaret set her chin. You can cooperate, she said, or we can make this harder. The thing about warnings is they work best when they're true. Standing there with the cheap vests creaking and the bogus seal catching the sun, truth felt like the one thing this little posse hadn't brought with them. A kid's voice from down the sidewalk. Mom, what's going on? The mom didn't answer. She was holding her own phone up now. Hands steady, eyes narrowed. Eddie rolled his shoulders and dropped his hands to a ready place near his belt, as if he had someplace official to go next. Turn around, he said. Hands behind your back. Daniel unfolded his arms, not fast, not slow. He set his feet a little wider on the driveway he'd paid for and looked Eddie in the mirrored lenses that reflected everything except the man wearing them. Not today, he said, and for a beat, none of us breathed. The accusation was on the table. The bluff was on the table. So was the trash bag still shining at Daniel's ankle like an ordinary thing that refused to be impressed by any of this. Not today, Daniel said, and the word hung there like a line chalked across the concrete. Margaret stepped into it. She didn't hurry. She always makes a point of not hurrying like time belongs to her. She moved a half step in front of the 2 men and squared her shoulders folder tight against her ribs. When she spoke, the neighborhood's small sounds, the sprinkler, ticks, the distant mower cough, seemed to pause to listen. You've always thought you're above the rules, Daniel, she said, voice trimmed and courtroom clean. Today, you're going to learn who actually holds authority on this street. She let authority sit in the air as if it had mass. Eddie brightened like a doll hearing the word go. Sean didn't brighten. He picked a spot 2 feet behind her right shoulder and stared at it, jaw working. Daniel didn't close the gap or turn away. He had that steady way about him that made your own pulse find level. If we're talking authority, he said, calm as a closed library, you might want to start with your uniforms. He pointed with his eyes, not his hands. That vest is 2 sizes too big. The side straps are dangling, the plate pocket's empty, which means it's just a shell. Yours, he nodded toward, Sean, is cinched so high it's pinching your airway. Neither of you is wearing a body cam. Those radios aren't paired to anything, no indicator. Light, no clip-on mic. And the boots, you didn't break those in on duty. Eddie's neck thickened. He rolled his shoulders and planted his feet like intimidation was a credential. We don't need to prove anything to you. Daniel's gaze slid to the patch on Eddie's chest, then back to his face. You put community enforcement on a Velcro square and think it turns a Saturday into a checkpoint. Margaret's smile stayed on, but it had to work harder. We have standards, she said. We have a system. That is what keeps a neighborhood livable. And you, Mr. Hayes, have made a point of ignoring both. A soft whisper of vinyl, a blind, inching higher across the street. The dad in the ball cap now had his phone up at chin height. 2 houses down, a little girl in socks stood on the cool tile of a foyer and leaned into a doorway until her mother's hand drew her back by the shoulder. Eddie eased forward another half step, bringing height and bulk and the scent of cheap nylon with him. He wanted to be the problem you solved by backing up. Sean didn't move. He kept twiddling a loose Velcro edge, the sound of it tearing and reseating over and over, a nervous metronome counting down to something he didn't know how to stop. Daniel's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Respect isn't forced, he said. It's earned. It hit the 3 of them in 3 different ways. Eddie took it like an insult. Sean took it like a memory. Margaret took it like an interruption to a script she'd already cast and rehearsed. She tipped her chin. Respect, she repeated with the little laugh that isn't a laugh. Respect is following the rules everyone else follows. Respect is not deciding the rules don't apply to you. Some people, she said, letting each word find its own landing, just don't fit in this neighborhood. There it was, this kind of line that doesn't need an underline. It didn't explode. It settled heavy and familiar, like a piece of furniture you realize you've been walking around for years. I felt my mouth go dry. Beside me, Mrs. Tran, who walks her dog at dawn, let out a breath she hadn't meant anyone to hear. Across the street, Mr. Harris retired, arms straightened until his shoulders remembered their old square. Daniel looked at her a long beat. No flinch, no joke to take the sting out. He let the words be what they were. You're talking about paint, colors, and hedges, he said, and you hired costumes to make the point. That isn't order. That's theater. Margaret's smile cracked in the middle. You've had every opportunity to correct your violations. We posted notices. We sent letters. You taped one to my door at 10 p.m. and took a picture for the group chat, Daniel said. You wrote up a non-compliance because my porch light was warm white instead of cool. And now you're in my driveway with 2 men who will put their hands on me if you nod. Eddie's jaw flexed. He liked the part where he could do something with his hands. He puffed his chest and let his arm hang a little too close to his belt, as if a tool there would be the thing that made this real. Turn around, he said again lower. Don't, Daniel told him, not as a plea or a taunt, but like a line item. Step onto my property with the intent to restrain me and you're past HOA. You're at trespass and assault. You touch me, and the problem you have won't be a committee. Sean's eyes pinged between them, panic beating at the skin under his beard. He looked to Margaret for a cue. She gave him one with a tight shake of her head, the kind that says we don't blink in front of an audience. From the sidewalk, someone whispered, "This isn't how HOAs work." Someone else whispered back, "Maybe call the real police." A third voice, older, said nothing, but the silence had a shape I recognized, disgust with a lid on it. Margaret targeted the crowd the way a politician does when the room starts to turn. "This is exactly how we prevent decline," she announced, pitching her voice for the porches and windows. "We enforce the standards we all agreed to. Otherwise, what's the point of having them?" "The point of standards," Daniel said, "isn't to give you a reason to humiliate your neighbors on a weekend. It's to make it easier to live next to each other." Eddie snorted, "Spare us the speech." Daniel let his eyes land on Eddie's mirrored lenses. He looked for a second like a man studying his own reflection and finding something he could use. "You press this," he told him, "and you will not like where it goes." A lawn flag lifted and snapped once in a light breeze that hadn't been there a minute before. A sprinkler timed out and went quiet. The cul-de-sac collected itself around the scene like a jury leaning forward in their chairs. Margaret tried to reset. "We're not the villains here," she said, and the word betrayed her because villains are a thing in stories and she'd come dressed for one. "We volunteer. We keep this place from sliding. People move here for a reason. People move here," Daniel said, "because it feels safe." He didn't say for whom. He didn't have to. The line found its mark without help. Eddie rolled his shoulders again, gathering himself to be the event. Sean's thumb shredded the Velcro edge into a soft fringe. Margaret's hand whitened on the spine of her folder. I could feel the pivot coming the way you feel rain before it darkens the sidewalk. We were past warnings and paperwork. We were in the part of a story where someone doubles down and the doubling makes the truth show its face. "Proceed," Margaret said softly to no one, and both of them at once. Eddie's chin ticked up. Sean's eyes begged off and then stayed. Daniel didn't move at Bomo. He didn't have to. His calm filled the space the way authority actually does quietly. And that's when the street, our street, with its neat edges and borrowed peace, understood we were no longer arguing about a sealant or a porch light. We were arguing about who gets to belong and who gets to say so. The morning had started with rules. It had arrived plainly at something else. I remember the exact moment the street stopped being just ours and turned into a stage. It wasn't when Eddie puffed up his chest or when Margaret rattled off her list. It was when a teenager's voice cut through the tension like a bell. "Yo, Mr. Hayes," Caleb Johnson shouted, phone held high. "I got you on live." He was 15, maybe 16, lanky, arms shooting the screen toward the scene like he'd just uncovered breaking news. That one sentence carried across the block, and suddenly the world felt bigger. It wasn't just our cul-de-sac anymore. It was an audience, neighbors, strangers, whoever was scrolling when Caleb's stream popped up. Eddie's reaction told the truth faster than anything else. His head snapped around mirrored shades, catching the boy in their cold reflection. "Put that phone down," he barked. Too fast, too sharp, not the steady authority of someone who belongs. It sounded like panic wrapped in command, and everyone heard it. Caleb didn't lower the phone. He shifted his weight like a kid who knows he shouldn't be there, but also knows he has to be. The red dot glowed steady on his screen. Comments were already trickling and little hearts fluttering up the side. Margaret saw the camera too, and her voice pitched higher than before. "We're authorized by the HOA, she snapped, forcing the words out like they could drown the recording. It was a brittle sound, one notch away from cracking. Meanwhile, porches were filling. A mother stepped onto her steps, arms wrapped tight around her daughter, the girl's wide eyes locked on the standoff. Mr. Tran from across the way leaned on his cane, shaking his head so slowly it might have been for his own benefit. Doors clicked, blinds shifted, and people who never said more than good morning were suddenly side by side, shoulder to shoulder, watching. Daniel hadn't moved since setting down the trash bag. He looked at Margaret, then Eddie, then Sean, his voice steady enough that you could hear it past the mower 2 streets over. "You're not law enforcement," he said. "You're trespassing." Simple words, clear words. And because Caleb's camera was locked on, those words weren't just for the street. They were for whoever tuned in live and later. Eddie's jaw clenched. Sean fiddled harder with his Velcro strap, the sound crisp in the hush that had taken over the cul-de-sac. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. But there was no denying it. Their stagecraft was unraveling under the glow of a smartphone lens. From somewhere to my left, I heard a whisper, sharp with worry. "What's happening to our street?" It was a mother standing half hidden behind her storm door, hands still gripping the knob as if she wasn't sure whether to step out or pull back in. The words weren't meant for the crowd, but the crowd felt them all the same. They landed heavy like a verdict. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about all of us, about the rules we thought we lived by, about whether a group with fake patches and borrowed boots could walk up and decide who belonged. More phones came up, tilting recording. The glow of tiny red dots dotted the air like fireflies. The men in their cheap vests weren't just facing Daniel, they were facing evidence that couldn't be stuffed back in a folder. The cul-de-sac had become something else entirely, a courtroom without walls with jurors sitting on porches, standing on sidewalks, whispering behind curtains. The air was thick with judgment, but no one needed a gavel. Every breath, every recorded second was proof, and the imposters knew it. Eddie shifted, trying to regain ground, but his voice betrayed him, shaky beneath the bluster. Margaret tried to speak louder, but each word felt smaller. Sean couldn't meet anyone's eye, and Daniel. He just stood there calm in a storm that wasn't supposed to exist, letting the weight of silence and truth do the work for him. That's how it felt to watch, like you were seeing the scales of something tilt, not in a courtroom miles away, but right there on our block, in real time on a Saturday morning that was supposed to be ordinary. I swear the whole block jumped when the sound hit. Clank, metal on metal, sharp and out of place on a quiet street. Eddie Cross had yanked a pair of cuffs from his vest and held them up like they were proof of authority. They dangled in the sunlight heavy enough to make the silence tilt. "You're under neighborhood arrest," he barked. His voice tried for flat and commanding, but it cracked just enough that you heard the strain underneath. The words hung there, absurd and dangerous all at once. A dog started barking 2 houses down. Somebody muttered, "What?" under their breath. Daniel didn't flinch. He took one measured step forward, hands still open, shoulders squared. His voice cut through Eddie's bluster with something steadier. "I've used real cuffs," he said. "Drop them before you ruin your life." He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. It was the way he said it, like fact, not advice. Like he'd been in rooms where steel bracelets weren't props, but sentences. Sean's face drained pale. His fingers worried the Velcro strap at his chest as if he could rip himself out of the vest. "Eddie, stop," he whispered, a plea that barely cleared his throat. But Margaret's voice cracked the moment open. "Do it," she snapped, loud enough for every porch and every camera. Her eyes glittered, her folder clutched tight as if escalation was the only way she could win. Eddie fed on that order, his chest swelled, his jaw clenched, and then like a man doubling down on a losing hand, he reached deeper into the vest. When his hand came back out, the cul-de-sac stopped breathing. It was a gun, black, blocky, familiar enough in shape to make the crowd gasp. A mother on the curb yanked her daughter behind her, pressing the girl's head against her side. "Mr." Tran stumbled backward on his cane. Phones shook in trembling hands, red dots blinking frantic. Eddie brandished it clumsily, the barrel sweeping too wide, fingers clenched too tight. Daniel's eyes locked on it, calm even now. His head tilted just slightly, as if he were cataloging a detail. Then his voice came low, almost pitying. "That's not even a service weapon." The line sliced through the panic. People blinked. Phones zoomed in. And sure enough, even from a distance, the flaws showed. The seam in the plastic frame, the toy-like shine on the grip, the absence of weight in Eddie's wrist. A replica, an airsoft gun. The truth rippled across the street. Fear turned into outrage. Somebody shouted, "He brought a fake." "Another." "You kidding me?" Sean's voice cracked. "You said you had it handled," he hissed at Eddie. His whole body sagged with shame. And then the story behind it began to leak out in fragments, neighbors whispering people who knew Eddie's troubles. Debt piled high, jobs lost, Margaret promising him a payout if he helped send a message. No real gear, no real authority, just a man desperate enough to strap on lies from a pawn shop. Eddie's arm trembled. The fake gun wavered in the air, like it knew it didn't belong there. Daniel didn't step back. He didn't reach for anything. He simply said, steady as stone point, that "at me, and the only thing you'll prove is how far you've already fallen." You could feel the block's heartbeat right then, fast, erratic, waiting for the wrong kind of bang. And then as quickly as it had spiked, the tension shifted. A breeze lifted the flag on the corner house, snapped once, and you saw a realization hit Eddie's face. His bluff was paper thin. The crowd knew it. Caleb's Livestream knew it. Margaret knew it too, though she held her jaw tight and barked nothing now. For the first time, Eddie looked smaller than the vest he wore. It was the first climax of the morning. Every neighbor, every phone, every whispered prayer tightened in fear, then let out a breath together when the truth landed. The weapon wasn't real, but the damage already was. And standing there in the middle of his own driveway, Daniel Hayes had turned a sham arrest into a mirror, showing everyone exactly what it was. Intimidation built on desperation, authority faked in nylon and plastic. We were all left staring, pulse still racing, knowing the show wasn't over, just waiting for the next move. The moment Eddie's fake gun started to look like more of a toy than a weapon, the street filled with a new sound, one that belonged. Sirens. That high, keening wail came barreling down the block, bouncing off brick and glass. Red and blue lights spun across our manicured lawns, painted the siding of every house in flashing strokes. Tires screeched, and a patrol car cut to the curb engine, humming like it meant business. Another slid in behind it, doors already cracking open, before the sirens had even wound down. For a split second, you could feel the neighborhood breathe out, real police finally. The adults straightened, the kids whispered, phones locked tighter on the scene. Order we thought was about to be restored. Margaret's smile bloomed like a victory flower. She stepped forward, folder pressed to her chest as if it had carried her this far. Her voice cut sharp and triumphant. "Officers, arrest him." The irony was that she didn't even point to Eddie still clutching his plastic toy. No. Her finger jabbed at Daniel Hayes. Two uniforms emerged, heavy belts, clinking eyes already scanning. Officer Ramirez was first, a stocky white cop with a jaw like granite and suspicion etched deep between his brows. Right behind him was Officer Green, Latina, calm-eyed, but her hand hovered near her holstered weapon. Both of them radiated tension, the kind that said they'd walked into scenes like this and knew one wrong twitch could ruin lives. Ramirez didn't waste time. He raised his weapon, sight locked on Daniel, and barked, "Step back." "Sir, hands where I can see them." The command slammed through the air like a hammer. For the first time all morning, Daniel looked almost cornered. His shoulders shifted, his breath hitched just enough that even from porches you saw it. Phones zoomed in, neighbors whispered. This wasn't staged anymore. This was danger real and loaded. Eddie grinned, catching a second wind off someone else's authority. Margaret's smile widened, her chin tilting higher. In her mind, this was the checkmate. Daniel didn't move fast. He didn't move slow. He lifted both hands, steady palms open to the flashing lights. His voice stayed even, but you could feel the strain in it, the weight of a man balancing calm with survival. "Officers," he said, projecting, so everyone heard, "I'm Special Agent Daniel Hayes, FBI. My badge is in my left pocket. My identification is with it." The street froze. That sentence didn't just hang, it carved. Ramirez's eyes narrowed finger stiff along his trigger guard. Green flicked a look at him, then back at Daniel, then stepped closer. She kept her right hand near her holster while her left reached for the pocket Daniel had indicated. Every neighbor held their breath as she pulled out the wallet case, snapped it open under the spinning lights, and leaned close. The badge caught the glow, first gold official, no mistaking. Then the ID, then her voice loud enough to carry down the block credentials valid. It was like a thunderclap. The air shifted, phones shook with sudden comments. Whispers became gasps. Margaret's face faltered for the first time. But Ramirez was the one who gave away the bigger truth. His gun lowered just slightly. His jaw worked. And then almost to himself, but loud enough for those of us straining to hear, he muttered, "Hayes, the one who took down the Dallas Syndicate." The words cracked through the crowd like fireworks. Dallas Syndicate. Everyone had heard of that bus, drugs, weapons, a network that had crippled a city block until federal hands cut it down. And right now, that man, that name, was standing in his own driveway, hands raised under neighborhood lights, accused of violating HOA rules. The imposters shifted uneasily. Sean's face went ashen. Realization draped heavy on his shoulders. Eddie's smirk melted his toy gun, suddenly nothing more than cheap plastic in a trembling hand. Margaret blinked too many times in a row, as if blinking could rewind the scene back to before. But it couldn't. The twist was out. The street our street knew now. Daniel Hayes wasn't just another neighbor. He was the most feared agent they never should have cornered. And from that moment on, it wasn't about a driveway or a porch light or even an HOA rule. It was about who had power that was real and who had only been pretending. Green's voice carried like a bell, credentials valid. The red-blue wash kept spinning, but something subtle in the air let go. Ramirez lowered his muzzle a few inches, not all the way, not relaxed, just enough to show he'd heard her and believed his own eyes, even if his jaw still argued with it. Daniel stood exactly where he'd been, hands up, palms out. "Officer," he said to Green, steady as a metronome, "my badge and ID are in your left hand. I won't move." Green nodded once, slid the wallet case into her offhand, and gave Ramirez a look that said, "We're shifting now." He exhaled through his nose, holstered with a practiced click, then kept his palm near the grip like a promise he could take back in a heartbeat. Daniel turned his head, not his shoulders, toward Eddie. His voice was low and shaped for the microphones that weren't there and the phones that were. "Impersonating an officer is a federal crime," he said. "Minimum 3 years. You could see the sentence land." Sweat brightened Eddie's scalp, beaded along the ridge where his sunglasses bit into skin. His throat worked. The fake gun in his hand dipped, recovered, dipped again. We're authorized," he managed like the word might grow bones if he said it enough. "The board." "The board can write notices," Daniel said, still calm, "not detain people. And you're carrying a replica. Every camera here has that frame by frame." Sean had been shrinking centimeter by centimeter, as if the vest itself were too heavy to hold up lies. His chin tucked to his chest, his eyes fixed on the driveway like there was a safe point marked there only he could see. The Velcro tab he'd been worrying was now a soft, frayed curl. He didn't speak, he didn't need to, his silence said the part he couldn't. Behind me, a whisper found shape. "He's the one who crushed the Houston cartel." Mr. Harris said to no one, and all of us, at once like a memory he'd been turning over, finally clicked into place. It ran through the crowd in ripples. Dallas-Houston syndicates and rings turned to headlines and then to stories neighbors told over fences. The man with his hands up in his own driveway had a history that showed up when real doors got kicked, when real cuffs clicked. Margaret heard the shift and lunged for the only foothold left to her. "He's abusing power," she shouted, the pitch a half step higher than before. "Intimidating us. This is our community. We have standards enough, our own." Three voices hit back at once. It wasn't a chant. It was a decision breaking out of people's mouths. Mrs. Trans was the clearest. The mother with the little girl added, "We saw everything." A third one of the teens didn't bother with words. He just pointed his phone red dot blazing like a witness oath. Caleb still lived narrated in that breathless teen way that makes news sound like weather. "Chat's saying it's fake," he said, eyes on his screen. "We got like 300 watching. They're clipping it. They're tagging the precinct." Green stepped to her left, putting her body between Eddie's muzzle and the rest of the world, and set her voice on low, clear command. "Sir," set the object on the ground and stepped back, slowly. Ramirez's posture echoed hers a half second later, the muscle memory of partners who have done this dance before. Hands visible. "Don't make me repeat myself." Eddie's mouth open-closed. He looked at Margaret for the script and found none. He looked at the replica and found less. The gun wavered to the side like it had finally confessed to being plastic. He bent awkward, set it on the driveway with a hollow clatter that rang cheaper than any of us expected, and stumbled a step back, palms up, fingers spread in a fan of fear. The cul-de-sac exhaled as if someone had opened a window. Green nudged the replica back with the toe of her boot, then scooped it with a practiced grip trigger. Discipline perfect even with toys. Secured, she told Ramirez, and then to Eddie, "Don't move." Daniel lowered his hands only when Green told him to. He didn't puff up or claim victory. He just let the moment breathe. Then he turned back to the men who'd come dressed to scare. "Here's where you are," he said, voice pitched for the gallery. "Impersonation. Attempted false imprisonment. Trespass. You add conspiracy if you acted under someone's direction." His eyes slid to Margaret and didn't hurry back. Eddie's knees seemed to forget how to lock. I was just..." He swallowed hard. Sweat drew a clean line through the dust on his temple. She said, "Careful." Margaret snapped, eyes flashing. "Don't let him twist. Don't do that." Daniel cut her off, gentle and lethal. "Don't use his fear as cover and call it leadership." Ramirez keyed his radio voice low but edged. "Dispatch confirmed federal credentials. Special Agent Daniel Hayes, FBI, 1028 on ID." A crackle of beat, the kind of pause that moves entire stories along. Then the return confirmed. Ramirez's eyes flicked to Daniel with a different kind of weight, respect wrestling down pride. The crowd had stopped being a crowd. It was a room now, a hearing without walls. Porches became pews, the driveway a dais. Evidence sat on the concrete, bogus paper cheap vests, a toy gun in a gloved hand, and a neighborhood's eyes turned into recorders. Margaret tried one more pivot, her voice reaching for the cadence that had always worked at meetings. "This is about standards," she insisted. "About people who think they're exceptions. The only exception I'm seeing," Mr. Harris said, stepping down one stair, "is you thinking bylaws outrank the Bill of Rights." A thin, nervous laugh darted across a porch and died there. No one followed it. Daniel didn't gloat. He laid the scene out like facts on a table. "No one touches anyone," he said, and he wasn't just talking to Eddie anymore. "No one escalates. Officers will handle what comes next." Green nodded, once professional and grateful for the assist that didn't overreach. She tagged the replica into an evidence bag and handed it off. Ramirez took half a step toward Eddie. "Hands on your head," he said. Eddie obeyed, fingers, tangled elbows high and shaking. Sean finally made a sound, a small torn thing. I didn't." He let the rest fall to the concrete with the morning. His head stayed down. The frayed Velcro strand tickled his knuckles like a consequence. Margaret, cornered by facts and the cameras that loved them, reached for a final incantation. "This is harassment. He's using his position to keep you from hurting someone," Daniel said. "To keep this from turning into a headline for all the wrong reasons." The mother tightened her arm around her daughter. The girl leaned out from the shelter of it, curious and brave. Across the street, a lawn sprinkler kicked back on and ticked, counting seconds that suddenly mattered again. What we were watching wasn't just a takedown, and we felt it. It was the sound of a neighborhood deciding what kind of place it wanted to be, with the evidence lined up in front of us and the playback already living on Caleb's stream. It was a courtroom under open sky with a judge made of simple things: truth you could see, fear you could smell, and a man in a driveway who refused to trade one for the other. Ramirez's shoulders eased a fraction. Green's eyes stayed alert, soft at the edges. Eddie trembled. Sean folded in on himself. Margaret stood very still, learning how thin power feels when it's made of paper and borrowed voices. And we, porch to porch, phone to phone, leaned in, waiting for the next sentence that would decide whose story this became. Sean was the first to break. It didn't happen with a shout. It started with a sound you might miss if you weren't listening, a thin, torn inhale that caught in his throat and wouldn't go anywhere. His shoulders trembled. The frayed strip of Velcro he'd been wearing all morning finally tore free in his fingers, and he stared at it like a piece of himself had come loose. "I can't," he said, voice splintering. He looked at Eddie, then at Daniel, then at the ground, and the words fell out raw and wet. "She paid us. She wanted him gone. If a cul-de-sac can gasp, ours did." It went through the crowd in a hush that wasn't quiet at all. Neighbors sucking air, phones lifting another inch, eyes widening as if the truth needed more room to fit. Caleb's stream numbers jumped so fast he said, "Whoa," without meaning to. Even the sirens echoing somewhere far off seemed to fade to let the words land. Margaret didn't move at first. Her jaw set, the folder dug into her ribs. Then she found her line and threw it like a rope. "He's lying," she snapped. He's trying to save himself. This is harassment. This is—" Daniel didn't raise his voice to cut her off. He only turned his head the way a man does when he's putting a fact where everyone can see it. "He's telling the truth you knew would come out," he said, calm as concrete. Then to Sean, "Not unkind. She'll let you rot in prison while she saves herself." Sean flinched like the sentence had weight. It did. He folded hands on his knees, head low, a man finally too tired to hold up a lie that heavy. "Mister?" Harris stepped forward from his porch, the retired Army straightness still in his spine. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "I fought for this country," he said, eyes pinned on Margaret, "not for frauds like you to dress up fear and call it leadership." Something in the street shifted then. Up until that moment, Margaret still had the posture of someone who believes a certain tone, a certain set of words will tug a situation back into her hands. But the tone wasn't working. The words weren't working. The cameras wouldn't let them. And the our crowd, the one she'd always counted on to nod along, wasn't nodding. She snapped. "He doesn't belong here," she cried, the sentence cracking open as it came. "He never has." It wasn't policy anymore. It wasn't standards. It wasn't even pretense. It was the quiet part said out loud, the furniture we'd all been walking around shoved into the middle of the room. The mother with the little girl didn't whisper this time. She pulled her daughter a step behind her and said it like a line drawn in chalk. "That's enough, Margaret." It traveled porch to porch, window to window, a dozen soft yeses stacking into something hard. "Enough. Stop," we saw. Heads turned away from Margaret in unison, that small, devastating gesture people use when they're done giving you the benefit of the doubt. A few neighbors folded their arms across their chests. Others let their hands fall as if the burden of pretending had finally slipped off. Green's face didn't change much, but her stance did firmer, not because Daniel needed protection, but because the street did. Ramirez's eyes flattened, offended on behalf of the badge and the block. Eddie stared at Margaret, realization draining the last of his bravado. Her promise didn't reach as far as a squad car. Sean made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. Either way, it was the noise of a man seeing the bill. Margaret tried to rebuild, snatching at her old scaffolding. "This is about the neighborhood," she insisted, voice pitching high, "about keeping standards, about—" "It's about respect," Daniel said, and his calm wasn't a performance. "And the difference between order and control." No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of line. It was a sentence that settled like a set of keys placed on a table, ordinary and absolute. You could see it in the faces around us, people adding up porch lights and hedges and Facebook posts, and realizing the sum was smaller than they'd been told. The street didn't roar. It decided. Caleb's chat bloomed with hearts and exclamation points. Mr. Tran shook his head, once a slow, deliberate no. The father in the ball cap lowered his phone just enough to look at his son and say, "Watch this. Remember it." Margaret stood alone in a place she had once dominated, made small not by shouting, but by witness. The vest looked cheaper. The folder looked thinner. The words she'd relied on all morning lay around her like props after the play. And we who had started the day as an audience turned as one and showed her the empty space where our approval used to be. Sean was the first to break. It didn't happen with a shout. It started with a sound you might miss if you weren't listening, a thin, torn inhale that caught in his throat and wouldn't go anywhere. His shoulders trembled. The frayed strip of Velcro he'd been wearing all morning finally tore free in his fingers, and he stared at it like a piece of himself had come loose. "I can't," he said, voice splintering. He looked at Eddie, then at Daniel, then at the ground, and the words fell out raw and wet. "She paid us. She wanted him gone. If a cul-de-sac can gasp, ours did." It went through the crowd in a hush that wasn't quiet at all. Neighbors sucking earphones, lifting another inch, eyes widening, as if the truth needed more room to fit. Caleb's stream numbers jumped so fast he said, "Whoa," without meaning to. Even the sirens echoing somewhere far off seemed to fade to let the words land. Margaret didn't move at first. Her jaw set, the folder dug into her ribs. Then she found her line and threw it like a rope. "He's lying," she snapped. He's trying to save himself. This is harassment. This is..." Daniel didn't raise his voice to cut her off. He only turned his head the way a man does when he's putting a fact where everyone can see it. "He's telling the truth you knew would come out," he said, calm as concrete. Then to Sean, "Not unkind, she'll let you rot in prison while she saves herself." Sean flinched like the sentence had weight. It did. He folded hands on his knees, head low, a man finally too tired to hold up a lie that heavy. Mr. Harris stepped forward from his porch, the retired Army straightness still in his spine. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "I fought for this country," he said, eyes pinned on Margaret, "not for frauds like you to dress up fear and call it leadership." Something in the street shifted then. Up until that moment, Margaret still had the posture of someone who believes a certain tone, a certain set of words, will tug a situation back into her hands. But the tone wasn't working. The words weren't working. The cameras wouldn't let them. And the our crowd, the one she'd always counted on to nod along, wasn't nodding. She snapped. "He doesn't belong here," she cried, the sentence cracking open as it came. "He never has." It wasn't policy anymore. It wasn't standards. It wasn't even pretense. It was the quiet part said out loud, the furniture we'd all been walking around shoved into the middle of the room. The mother with the little girl didn't whisper this time. She pulled her daughter a step behind her and said it like a line drawn in chalk. "That's enough, Margaret." It traveled porch to porch, window to window, a dozen soft yeses stacking into something hard. "Enough. Stop." We saw. Heads turned away from Margaret in unison, that small, devastating gesture people use when they're done giving you the benefit of the doubt. A few neighbors folded their arms across their chests. Others let their hands fall as if the burden of pretending had finally slipped off. Green's face didn't change much, but her stance did firmer, not because Daniel needed protection, but because the street did. Ramirez's eyes flattened, offended on behalf of the badge and the block. Eddie stared at Margaret, realization draining the last of his bravado. Her promise didn't reach as far as a squad car. Sean made a sound that might have been a song or a laugh. Either way, it was the noise of a man seeing the bill. Margaret tried to rebuild, snatching at her old scaffolding. "This is about the neighborhood," she insisted, voice pitching high, "about keeping standards, about..." "It's about respect," Daniel said, and his calm wasn't a performance. "And the difference between order and control." No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of line. It was a sentence that settled like a set of keys placed on a table, ordinary and absolute. You could see it in the faces around us, people adding up porch lights and hedges and Facebook posts and realizing the sum was smaller than they had been told. The street didn't roar. It decided. Caleb's chat bloomed with hearts and exclamation points. Mr. Trans shook his head once, a slow, deliberate no. The father in the ball cap lowered his phone just enough to look at his son and say, "Watch this, remember it." Margaret stood alone in a place she had once dominated, made small not by shouting, but by witness. The vest looked cheaper. The folder looked thinner. The words she'd relied on all morning lay around her like props after the play. And we who had started the day as an audience turned as one and showed her the empty space where our approval used to be. The street had already decided, but the law still had to catch up to it. Ramirez moved first. He stepped in on Eddie with that practiced economical motion you only learn by doing it 1,000 times. Hands behind your back, he said. Interlace your fingers. Eddie obeyed. The bravado was gone. The replica lay in an evidence bag. Sweat traced a clean line down his cheek. Click, click. Real cuffs have a sound that ends arguments. Eddie flinched at the second ratchet like it pinched his pride more than his wrists. Sean didn't wait to be told anything. He folded where he stood and sank to the curb, legs out, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The frayed strip of Velcro dangled from his fingers like a white flag. He wasn't looking at anyone. He was listening to consequences arrive. Margaret tried to outrun them. She stepped forward half a step, just enough to pretend the ground still belonged to her, and thrust the folder like a shield. I'm HOA president, she shouted the title, hitting the air like a password that used to open doors. You can't do this. Daniel didn't move toward her, and he didn't move away. He met her eyes steady. That title doesn't put you above the law, he said, voice low enough to make the words heavier. It means you should have known better. If there'd been a gavel, it would have fallen there. Instead, there was Ramirez's radio clipped to his shoulder posture, set to official. He turned just enough to put his body between Margaret and the men he'd already secured, then spoke for the record in the cameras. Margaret Sloan, he said, pronouncing each syllable like he was setting them down where they couldn't be lost. You're under arrest for obstruction and conspiracy. Place your hands where I can see them. The sentence rolled across the driveways and settled in every front yard. You could feel the relief arrive before the sound did. It started as a thin patter, one pair of hands on a porch, then another, applause that gathered itself into something with a shape, justice, justice, a chant. Not angry, not gloating, released. The mother with the little girl clapped once hard, tears bright in her eyes. The girl copied her, a heartbeat later, small palms, serious. Mr. Harris gave one sharp nod and brought his hands together like punctuation. Even the father in the ball cap, who hadn't said a word all morning, let out a breath and joined in. Caleb's stream erupted hearts comments, little exploding emojis riding up the edge of his screen. Margaret stood very still in the middle of it, her mouth open-closed. She tried to lift the folder again, but it had shrunk, somehow become just paper. Green stepped to her shoulder tone, calm as procedure. Hands visible, ma'am. Thank you. And because Green was who she was, the politeness didn't feel like permission. It felt like the last courtesy before the door clicked shut. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He watched the woman who'd spent a morning playing at power and said the only line worth saying, "You just told everyone who you really are." She blinked. It landed. Maybe for the first time all day, she heard herself in someone else's voice. Ramirez moved in quick and clean. The cuffs whispered around Margaret's wrists and found their setting. She sucked a breath as metal met skin, the folder slipping under Green's foot and staying there flattened. Ramirez read the necessary lines, rights processed the road ahead. Margaret tried one last protest that sounded like a question, even to her. It faded under the weight of procedure. Eddie's shuffled wrists, secure shoulders slumped, as if the vest had finally admitted it was just fabric. Sean looked up, eyes red, and saw what choices look like when they're finished. He nodded to no one and everyone, a small, broken gesture that said he understood the bill. The chant dimmed to murmurs, then quiet, the kind that isn't empty but satisfied. Neighbors lowered their phones, not because the story was over, but because the ending was clear enough to live without a filter. Some people stepped closer to each other, fingers on elbows, hands on shoulders, checking in with touch, where words would have fumbled. Green glanced at Daniel. There was a moment there you could almost miss professional respect meeting moral gratitude. Daniel gave a single nod back. He still stood in his driveway, the trash bag, a black comma at his ankle, a small reminder that none of this had needed to happen. When the patrol car doors opened, they sounded like the beginning of a new paragraph. Eddie went first, careful steps, head down. Sean followed under escort, not resisting, not anything just done. Margaret hesitated, then sat spine-stiff, eyes fixed past the windshield at a street she no longer ran. The red-blue lights washed over the brick and the hedges and the faces that had watched a morning fall apart and put itself back together. Somewhere in the distance, a mower finally finished its row. The blue jay on the crepe myrtle cleared its throat and sang once as if to mark the hour. And that's how the last peak broke, not with a shout, but with the clean click of real authority, the final simple courage of a neighborhood choosing what it was going to be. By morning, the street felt lighter, like someone had opened a window in the night and let the old air out. The HOA called a special meeting at the rec room by the pool folding chairs, a wobbly mic, a podium that had seen too many bake sale speeches. People came early, no one kept their heads down. Margaret sat in the front row without the folder hands clasped so tight her knuckles chalked white. The board read out procedures, then the facts we'd all watched with our own eyes. When the vote came, it wasn't dramatic. It was clean. She was removed. A few folks stared at their shoes, most stared straight ahead. Reputation doesn't fall like a tree. It unthreads. You could hear the threads snap. On the walk home, Caleb jogged beside his mom phone held like a trophy. It's at 40,000 views, he told anyone who'd listen. By sundown, it would be 6 figures. He'd titled it, "The Day Fake Cops Fell." The comments were a chorus of, "We saw it, we get it, don't let it slide." For once, the internet felt like a witness instead of a rumor mill. Later, back on our block, neighbors drifted toward Daniel's driveway like iron to a magnet, one at a time, then in 2s and 3s. No speeches. Just people who had something to return, a handshake, an apology, a thank you. They wanted to say face to face. Mr. Harris stood with Daniel a long minute and nodded the kind of nod men passed between them when words would only dilute it. Daniel kept it simple. Real power comes from service, not fear, he said. And he said it the way he'd said everything all weekend, like a fact you could set your coffee cup on. The line didn't need applause. It needed to be carried home. The little girl who'd watched from behind her mother's arm yesterday edged forward sneaker toe, tracing half circles on the concrete. "Mr. Hayes," she asked, small but steady, "will you always protect us?" Daniel crouched to her height. "That's my duty," he said, letting the words sit there long enough for her to try it on. Then he smiled. "But courage starts with you." She nodded like she'd been handed something fragile and important, and she tucked it away. Ramirez and Green came by just before dinner to finish statements, uniforms softer against a quiet street. Paperwork sounds different when the crisis has passed, pens click instead of snap. As they turned to go, Ramirez glanced back at Daniel, a half smile cutting through the granite. "Now I see why they call him the most feared," he said to Green, not loud, but the kind of line a block holds onto. Green just dipped her chin, agreement, respect, in the faint relief of a shift ending without a casualty. By dusk, the cul-de-sac had found its ordinary again, sprinklers, ticking grills, catching somebody practicing piano with the window open. Mrs. Tran waved on her dog's loop. The father in the ball cap played horse with his son under the hoop, missing on purpose and not pretending otherwise. We didn't trade knowing looks. We traded easy ones. It felt like the right kind of order, the kind no one had to fear. Next morning, I saw him early as usual. Daniel stepped onto his porch with a mug steam curling into the cool air. He stood a moment, not posing, just taking in what he'd always cared for: his house, our street, the simple geometry of neighbors belonging. Down by the curb, a black trash bag waited for pickup, like a period ending a long sentence. The blue jay announced the hour from the crepe myrtle. Somewhere a mower turned over and settled into its steady hum. And though the light was soft and the day ordinary, something in the quiet held a shape we all recognized: truth that had been tested and stayed standing. That's the heart of it. Real power serves. It doesn't scare. Communities are safest when neighbors choose courage over silence, truth over theater, and respect over control. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more true, meaningful tales that honor justice and empathy. Your support gives our team the energy to keep crafting quality storytelling every week. Thank you. Drop a comment with the moment that stayed with you. We read every one. This is Mr. Max Stories, where every tale ends with a compass pointing to what's right.